They thought I was too weak to fight back after rehab, but I'd been watching their every move. The day I walked out of rehab, everyone looked at me like I was washed-up trash. My aunt whispered, "She won't make it a week." My cousin smirked and said, "She's too weak to fight back." They thought the treatment center broke me. But the truth was worse for them. I had been watching everything they did while I was gone. My phone, which they thought they destroyed, had cloud backup. Every message they sent about selling my things, moving into my room, and draining my account came right to me. I kept quiet. I smiled like a harmless kitten. But inside, I was fire. The house I returned to didn't feel like mine. My clothes were gone, my bed replaced, and my cousin's shoes were scattered everywhere. I asked calmly, "Where's my stuff?" They shrugged, pretending I was stupid. I nodded slowly. I had proof. I had patience. And I had a plan. They mistook my silence for weakness, but they would soon learn that I hadn't come home to cry. I came home to collect everything they stole, piece by piece. The first night back, I slept on the couch because my cousin claimed my room needed time to air out. That was a lie. I already knew she had turned it into her beauty studio while I was gone. I heard the voice notes she sent to her friends bragging about it. I didn't argue. I just lay there with a blanket that smelled like dust and let them think they had won. My uncle walked past me and dropped his empty soda can right beside my head like I was invisible. I didn't react. I kept breathing slow and steady, just like the therapist taught me. What they didn't know was that every move they made pushed me closer to the edge, and when I break, I don't scatter, I strike. Around midnight, I checked my cloud folder again. More screenshots. More voice notes. More evidence. They were planning to move my things out for good by the weekend. I whispered to myself, "Good. Keep going." Because I needed them to feel safe before I pulled the ground out from under them. Weak? No. I was gathering power. By morning, they were louder. My cousin walked around in my slippers. My aunt kept telling people on the phone that she rescued me. My uncle asked if rehab fixed my brain. I didn't reply. They wanted a reaction, something to use against me. But I had learned silence. Sharp, calm silence. After breakfast, I walked into my old room. The smell of heavy makeup and hairspray hit me immediately. My mirror had been replaced with a bright ring light. My clothes? Gone. My books? Packed in trash bags. My cousin rushed in and blocked the doorway like she owned the place. "You're not allowed in here," she snapped. I looked at her, then at my closet, then back at her. "Okay," I said, and walked out. She smiled, thinking she won. But she didn't know I still had legal access to the house. My name was on the documents. Not hers. And not my aunt's. That room wasn't hers, not even for another day. They thought I was scared. They didn't understand that the longer they pushed, the stronger I became. They were building their own downfall. Later that afternoon, I went to the backyard to breathe. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was rejecting me. I could hear them laughing inside, probably mocking me again. I sat on the old bench under the mango tree and pulled out my phone. I replayed the voice note from my aunt. "Once she settles in, we take her account card." Rehab must have left her confused. I pressed pause. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. I knew better than to confront them with anger. I needed strategy. I opened a folder labeled Storm, the one where I kept every lie they told, every plan they made, every insult they said. Evidence. Solid, loud, undeniable. The counselor at rehab told me, healing doesn't mean letting people walk over you. I held on to that. So I wrote down every detail in a notebook, dates, times, actions. They thought I was outside crying. I was outside documenting. One day, they would sit in the same chairs they mocked me from, but this time they wouldn't be laughing. They had no idea how close they were to losing everything. That evening, the house was filled with the sound of fake confidence. My cousin blasted music. My aunt argued with someone on the phone. My uncle watched TV with the volume high. All of them acting like the house was theirs. I quietly made myself a cup of tea, ignoring the chaos around me. My aunt suddenly turned and said, "You should be grateful. We kept your things for months." I nearly choked on my tea. They kept my things? I had recordings proving they sold half of them. But I just nodded slowly. She continued, "Don't bring drama. We want peace." I almost laughed. Peace? They invaded my life, my space, my dignity. Yet I smiled and said, "Of course. Because the secret to winning a war is letting the enemy believe you're not fighting." After dinner, I checked my folder again. Notifications kept popping up. Messages about clearing the room for good. I locked my phone and breathed deeply. They forgot something important. I wasn't the weak one. I was the only one awake. And I was ready. The next morning, I went to the community center where I used to volunteer before rehab. The coordinator, Mrs. Balewa, hugged me tight and said she missed me. She didn't treat me like I was broken. She treated me like I mattered. I asked if I could use the computer room. Once inside, I logged into my cloud drive again and organized the evidence into folders. Financial fraud. Property invasion. Harassment. Recorded admissions. Timestamped messages. I stared at the screen and realized something. They weren't just cruel, they were careless. That made them dangerous, but it also made them predictable. When I finished organizing, I printed a few important documents and placed them in an envelope. Not the final weapon, but the first step. On my way home, I rehearsed what the therapist taught me: stay grounded, stay silent, stay focused. As I walked in, they barely looked up. Good. They were comfortable. Comfortable people make mistakes. I went to the couch, opened my notebook, and continued writing. One day soon, they would ask when everything changed. The truth? It was changing right under their noses. That night, they forgot to save dinner for me. My aunt said, "Oh, we thought you weren't hungry." I wasn't upset. I warmed leftover rice and ate quietly. They watched me like they expected me to snap. But I had learned to control my reactions. My cousin got bold and said, "You should thank us. We survived while you were busy fixing yourself." I looked up slowly. "Did you?" I asked. She didn't like that. My uncle grunted and said, "Don't start trouble." I nodded and finished eating. When they went to bed, I walked to the room they stole from me and leaned against the door. Their arrogance had reached its peak. That meant the fall was coming. I checked my bag to make sure everything was still inside: printed screenshots, transcripts, photos. Then, I made a call. To someone they never expected. I whispered, "I'm ready." A calm voice replied, "Then let's begin." As I hung up, I felt the shift. For the first time since returning home, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared. The next day, a woman from the welfare office arrived at the house. My aunt panicked instantly and whispered, "What is happening?" The woman asked to speak with everyone. My aunt forced a smile, pretending everything was fine. My cousin stood behind her, arms folded. My uncle frowned in confusion. I sat calmly on the couch. The welfare officer explained she received a report about financial manipulation and possible exploitation. My aunt's eyes widened. "Who reported that?" she demanded. The officer replied, "We received detailed documentation." I didn't look up. I didn't need to. The power had shifted. My cousin started shouting, "This is lies. She's trying to ruin us." The officer held up her hand and said, "We will investigate thoroughly." After she left, the house turned silent. My aunt finally snapped, "What did you do?" I looked at her and said, I told the truth. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not weak, not broken, but dangerous to the lies she built. For the first time, she backed away. They were scared. They followed me around the house for days after that, whispering about fixing things. My cousin tried to act friendly. She offered me tea. She asked if I needed anything. I just said no. My aunt stopped shouting on the phone. She lowered her voice whenever she walked past me. My uncle tried to joke with me, but I didn't laugh. The silence scared them more than anything. One evening, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. My cousin said, she has something. She didn't go to rehab to be quiet. My aunt hissed, we should have been careful. My uncle groaned, what do we do now? I stepped into the doorway. They jumped. You don't have to do anything, I said softly. Just keep being yourselves. They didn't understand what I meant. But they would. Because their true behavior was exposing them faster than I ever could. I walked away and smiled to myself. They pushed me to the edge, but they forgot one thing, when I come back from the edge, I come back stronger. 2 days later, the welfare office called for a second visit. This time, they wanted financial statements from the past 6 months. My aunt almost fainted. She had been using my allowance for her personal expenses. My cousin had transferred money from my account to hers. My uncle had borrowed money from my savings and never returned it. They all looked at me as if I summoned the investigation myself. But the truth was, they did this to themselves. Their greed opened the door. I just held it open. I watched them run around the house searching for documents, receipts, anything to defend themselves. My cousin snapped at my aunt. My aunt blamed my uncle. My uncle blamed everyone. It was beautiful chaos. Meanwhile, I sat on the couch reading a book. When the officer arrived, I handed her the accurate records, organized, printed, and highlighted. My aunt whispered, you planned this. I nodded gently. You left me no choice. The officer thanked me. The others looked at me with pure fear. The house had finally shifted. Their reign was ending. 3 days later, the officer returned with 2 more people, a financial auditor and a family protection representative. My aunt nearly dropped her plate. My cousin stood frozen, her makeup half done. My uncle tried to act calm but kept wiping sweat from his forehead. The auditor explained they would conduct interviews separately. That's when real panic set in. My aunt insisted, this is unnecessary. She's exaggerating. But they ignored her. I went first. My interview was simple. I showed dates, messages, transactions. I answered questions calmly. When my cousin went in, I could hear her voice shaking through the wall. My aunt followed, loud and frantic. My uncle kept stumbling over his answers. When they finished, the auditor spoke softly, there's overwhelming evidence of financial exploitation. My aunt gasped like she had been stabbed. My cousin burst into tears. My uncle sank into the chair. I didn't smile. I just breathed. For months, they treated me like a burden. For months, they took advantage of my absence. Now the truth was unfolding in front of them, and they couldn't control it. Their power was slipping away faster than they realized. After the auditors left, the silence in the house became heavy. No one spoke. No one laughed. My cousin avoided eye contact. My aunt pretended to sleep all afternoon. My uncle paced the hallway like a trapped animal. It was strange watching the same people who once shouted at me now whispering around me like I was the danger. At dinner, no one touched their food. My aunt finally broke the silence and asked, "What do you want?" I looked at her and said, "Respect. And my things." She swallowed hard. "We don't have everything." I already knew that. "Then compensate me," I replied. My cousin's fork clattered to the floor. "Where will we get money?" she whispered. I didn't answer. Their fear was not my problem. I stood up to leave. My aunt reached for my arm, but I stepped back. "Never touch me without my permission again," I said quietly. They stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. I wasn't the broken girl who left for rehab. I was someone who finally understood her worth. And now they had to understand it too. By morning, they began acting overly polite. My aunt cooked breakfast, something she hadn't done in months. My cousin tried to give me her makeup products, pretending she cared. My uncle offered to fix my broken suitcase. I accepted nothing. These weren't apologies, they were fear-driven performances. Real remorse doesn't come after consequences, it comes before them. While they hovered around me, I prepared the next step. I went back to the community center and asked Mrs. Balewa for the lawyer's number she once mentioned. When I called him, I introduced myself and explained my situation. He didn't sound surprised. "This is more common than you think," he said. We scheduled a meeting. As I walked home, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I wasn't doing this out of revenge. I was doing this to protect myself. When I arrived, my aunt asked where I went. I simply said, "Out." She didn't dare question further. They were finally learning something they should have known from the start: silence from me is not weakness. It is warning. That evening, something unexpected happened. My cousin entered the living room and sat across from me, knees pulled to her chest. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I closed my notebook. She looked nervous. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I studied her face. There was guilt, yes, but also fear of losing comfort. "What are you sorry for?" I asked. She hesitated. "For taking your room. For using your things. For everything." Her voice cracked. I didn't rush to comfort her. She didn't deserve that from me. "You didn't think of me once," I said. She nodded slowly. "I know. I was selfish." I leaned forward. "You were cruel." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know." For the first time, she didn't defend herself. She didn't lie. She didn't pretend. It didn't erase what she had done, but it shifted something. "It's not me you need to convince," I told her. She looked toward the hallway, where my aunt stood listening. I could see the realization hit her: changing her behavior wasn't enough. She had to face what she had caused. That was her real punishment. The next morning, I met with the lawyer. I brought the folder labeled Storm. When I placed it on his desk, he raised his eyebrows. "You've been thorough," he said. I nodded. I had to be. We reviewed everything, from bank transfers to voice recordings. He explained my rights clearly. "You can file for full restitution, emotional harm, and property loss." My stomach tightened. This was real. "Will they go to jail?" I asked. "That depends," he replied. On the way home, I felt something shift inside me. Not revenge, clarity. When I arrived, they were all waiting in the living room. My aunt asked, "Where did you go?" "Lawyer," I replied. The color drained from her face. My uncle grabbed the chair's arm so tightly it creaked. My cousin stared at the floor. I sat down calmly. "You have 1 week to return everything you took or compensate me," I said. 1 week. My aunt stammered, "We don't have money, not my problem." I stood up and went to the kitchen. Their fear didn't satisfy me. It simply confirmed something important: I had taken my life back. The week that followed felt like watching a slow storm crush a fragile house. My aunt made frantic phone calls all day, trying to borrow money. My uncle worked extra shifts. My cousin tried selling her wigs and clothes online. It was almost pitiful. Almost. But they forgot one thing. None of this would have happened if they had simply treated me like a human being. By day 5, they had returned 3 bags of my belongings. Most of it wasn't mine. I opened a bag and found clothes I had never worn. "Where's the rest?" I asked. My aunt whispered, "Gone." I nodded. "Then compensate me." She burst into tears. "Please, we're trying." I looked at her without emotion. "You weren't trying when I slept on the couch." She had no answer. That night, I received a call from the welfare officer. "We've concluded the investigation," she said. "Would you like to file formal charges?" I looked around the quiet house and said, "Yes." It wasn't cruelty. It was closure. They made choices. Now they had to face the consequences. The next morning, officers arrived, not to arrest them, but to serve them official notices. My aunt collapsed onto the couch. My cousin started crying. My uncle muttered curses under his breath. I watched calmly. Nothing about this felt dramatic, it felt necessary. After the officers left, my aunt approached me slowly. "We raised you," she said. I looked at her. "You used me." She shook her head, "We were struggling." I replied, "So was I." "But you chose to hurt me." My cousin walked in and whispered, "What happens now?" I didn't soften my voice. "You answer for what you did." My aunt tried again. "We're family." I shook my head. "Family protects you. You exploited me." I walked away, leaving them in silence. The truth was simple, I wasn't punishing them. I was freeing myself from them. For years, I carried the weight of their expectations, insults, and manipulation. Rehab didn't break me. It opened my eyes. And now that I could finally see clearly, I wasn't going back to blindness. A few days later, I received an email from the lawyer. He needed one final signature to move forward with the restitution process. I scheduled the appointment. When I told my aunt, she clutched her chest dramatically. "You're destroying us," she wailed. "No," I said softly. "You destroyed yourselves." My cousin followed me to my room, my real room, which I reclaimed. "Can we fix this?" she asked. "You can change," I said. "But you can't change what already happened." She nodded, understanding. Later that night, I overheard her telling my aunt, "We pushed her too far." My aunt whispered, "She was supposed to come back weak." Hearing that made my decision even easier. They never wanted me healed, they wanted me dependent. Controlled. Small. But they had forgotten something powerful, I don't stay small. Not anymore. When I went to bed, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow would be the day everything officially shifted. And for once, the future didn't scare me. It felt like mine. The next day, I met the lawyer again. I signed the final document. As the pen touched the paper, I felt something uncoil inside me, guilt, fear, doubt all slipping away. "This protects you," he said. "And it holds them accountable." I thanked him and walked out with my head high. When I returned home, I found my aunt sitting at the dining table with swollen eyes. My uncle stood behind her. My cousin sat quietly, fingers trembling. They looked at me like I held their fate. Maybe I did. My aunt whispered, "What do we do now?" I said, "Cooperate." Then I added something that made her flinch. "And stay out of my life." She gasped. "You're leaving?" "Yes," I said. "Today." My cousin looked devastated, but it was too late. I packed my things, what was left of them, and walked toward the door. My aunt rushed forward, but my uncle held her back. He finally understood. They all did. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something better. I moved into a small studio apartment the next morning. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Mine. Something I hadn't had in a long time. I set my bag on the floor and breathed deeply. No shouting. No insults. No tension. Just quiet. I sat by the window and allowed myself to cry, not from sadness, but from relief. That night, I made a simple meal and ate it alone, peacefully. No one watched me. No one criticized me. I slept in a bed that belonged only to me. The next day, I got a call from the welfare officer. "We've completed everything," she said. "You handled this with courage." I thanked her. For the first time in years, my life didn't feel like a battlefield. I felt steady. I felt whole. The truth was, leaving them behind didn't break me. Staying with them had. Now that I was gone, I could finally start healing, not for them, but for myself. 1 week later, the restitution process officially began. My aunt tried calling me multiple times. I didn't answer. My cousin sent voice notes apologizing again. I listened, but I didn't reply. Some things don't need responses. My uncle didn't contact me at all. I heard through a neighbor that the investigators returned to the house. They had to answer for everything they did. I wasn't happy about their suffering, but I wasn't sad either. This was simply balance returning to my life. That afternoon, I bought a small notebook and labeled it New Start. I wrote 3 things: I am stronger than my past. I deserve respect. I will never shrink myself again. Writing that felt like rebuilding my foundation brick by brick. When I finished, I placed the notebook on my nightstand and opened the curtains. Sunlight filled the room. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself, not for fighting back, but for surviving everything they tried to crush me with. One evening, my cousin showed up at my apartment. I didn't expect that. She looked different, tired, humble, almost broken. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside. She sat on the floor, not the chair. "We lost a lot," she said softly. "But I know we caused it." That surprised me. "What do you want from me?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. I just needed to tell you, you didn't deserve any of it." Her voice cracked. "You were always kind. And we took advantage of that." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you for saying that." She wiped her eyes. "I'm learning." I nodded. "Good. Keep learning." She stood to leave. At the door, she turned and said, "I hope you heal." For the first time, I believed her. When she left, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt closure. And closure is heavier than forgiveness, but far more freeing. Weeks passed. My life grew quieter. Softer. Better. I started volunteering again. I rebuilt my routine. I reconnected with friends I had pushed away before rehab. My confidence didn't come back all at once. It came slowly, like morning light creeping through curtains. One day, I got a message from the lawyer: restitution approved. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not because I needed the compensation, but because it marked the end of a long, painful chapter. I thought about everything I had endured, the nights on the couch, the missing clothes, the cruel words. And then I thought about where I was now. Safe. Independent. Whole. I opened my New Start notebook and added a 4th line: I reclaim my story. I closed the notebook and felt something inside me settle. I wasn't the weak girl they expected after rehab. I was someone who rose after being pushed down. Someone who watched. Someone who learned. Someone who survived. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside the old house. Not to confront them. Not to reconnect. Just to see it from the outside. It looked smaller than I remembered. Faded. Cracked. My aunt came out and froze when she saw me. I nodded politely but didn't move closer. My cousin waved weakly from the doorway. My uncle stayed hidden inside. I realized something then: the house had always been a prison for me, not a home. And I was finally free of it. My aunt whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded. Better than I've ever been. She opened her mouth to apologize, but I lifted my hand. I'm not here for that, I said. I just came to say goodbye, to this place, not to you. She looked confused. I turned around and walked away, feeling lighter with each step. That house no longer had power over me. Nothing they did held me anymore. My story was moving forward, and they were staying behind. Months later, sitting in my apartment with sunlight pouring in, I realized something powerful. Healing didn't come from revenge or legal action. It came from reclaiming my life, day by day, choice by choice. I looked around at my small but peaceful space. My plants. My books. My quiet. My freedom. I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching people walk by. My phone buzzed. A message from the welfare officer. Proud of your progress, she wrote. I smiled. I wasn't the girl who walked out of rehab trembling. I wasn't the girl who slept on a dusty couch. I wasn't the girl who let people take advantage of her. I was the girl who stood up. Who fought back with truth, not anger. Who learned the power of her own silence. And if anyone ever asked me how I survived everything, I would say this: they thought I was too weak to fight back. But I wasn't weak. I was watching. I was learning. I was becoming someone unstoppable.